Daniel lived alone near the edge of a wide desert canyon, far from towns and busy roads. His ranch sat on open land with tall grass, dry wind, and long, quiet days. Most mornings, he woke up before sunrise, fed his horses, checked the fences, and rode out to make sure everything on his land was calm. He liked peace. He liked silence. And he liked knowing every corner of the land he lived on. But even with so much space around him, there were moments when the world surprised him. One such moment happened late one afternoon, when the sun was falling behind the canyon, and the air started to cool after a hot day. Daniel was riding back from checking a water spring when he heard a thin, shaky sound coming somewhere from below the canyon ridge. At first, he thought it was the cry of a wounded animal, maybe a young deer, or some creature that had slipped on the rocks. But when he stopped his horse and listened again, the sound came a second time, a soft, frightened cry that did not sound like any animal he knew. It sounded human. It sounded like a child. Daniel felt a sudden rush in his chest. He climbed off his horse quickly and followed the sound, stepping carefully down a narrow path between the rocks. He kept one hand on the canyon wall to keep his balance. The rocks were loose, and the drop below was steep. As he moved lower, the cry came again, this time weaker, almost like someone had been calling for a long time and was running out of voice. Daniel called out gently, trying not to scare whoever it was. He said he was a friend. He said he wanted to help, but there was no answer. Only the sound of wind brushing against the dry brush around him. He kept going. After a few minutes, he reached a small ledge covered in dust and broken branches. There, behind a fallen tree trunk, he finally saw her, a small Apache girl, no older than 7 or 8. Her hair was messy, her clothes were dirty from running through the canyon, and her cheeks were streaked with dried tears. When she saw Daniel, she froze like a frightened bird. Daniel stepped very slowly. He crouched so he wouldn't look big or threaten her. He didn't speak loudly. He only whispered that she was safe now, and he wouldn't hurt her. The girl didn't move. Her dark eyes watched him carefully, full of fear and exhaustion. She looked like she had been hiding for hours, maybe since morning. Daniel saw scratches on her arms from running through bushes, and her feet were bruised from walking barefoot on rough ground. He set his hands on the ground, palms open, so she could see he carried nothing in them. Then, he lowered his voice even more and told her he only wanted to help. After a long moment, the girl blinked slowly, and something in her expression changed. It wasn't trust yet, but it wasn't fear either. She seemed to sense he meant no harm. When Daniel inched closer, she didn't run. That was enough. He gently asked her name, but she didn't reply. She whispered something very softly, but it wasn't English. Daniel didn't recognize the words. Still, he could hear the fear and sadness in her voice. Carefully, he reached out his hand. The girl hesitated, then touched his fingers with the tips of her own, as if testing whether he was real. Finally, she allowed him to lift her gently into his arms. She was light, far too light for a child her age. When he stood, she rested her head on his shoulder, tired to the point she could no longer hold it up. Daniel climbed back toward the path, carrying her carefully so the rough rocks wouldn't scrape her. His horse was waiting at the top, ears alert, watching him. Daniel placed the girl gently on the saddle, sitting in front of him so she wouldn't fall. She held onto his shirt with her small hand, gripping tightly, even though she said nothing. Daniel rode toward his cabin with steady speed, wanting to get her somewhere warm before night came fully. The sky was turning orange and purple by the time they reached his ranch. He lifted the girl down and carried her inside. She didn't fight, only clung to him like someone who had been alone for too long. Inside the cabin, he placed her near the fireplace and lit the fire. She shivered, even though the room wasn't cold. Fear often made people cold, he thought. Daniel warmed water, tore a soft cloth, and cleaned the dust from her face and hands. She watched him with wide eyes, but she didn't pull away. When he gave her a cup of warm soup, she held it with both hands and drank slowly, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to drink too fast. He noticed she kept glancing at the door, as if expecting someone to appear. Maybe her mother, he guessed. Maybe she had been separated from her family. After she ate, she sat quietly on a blanket. Daniel tried gently again to ask her name. She didn't answer his question directly, but she whispered a single word, her mother's name. She repeated it again and again in a soft voice. That told Daniel everything he needed to know. She was lost. She was scared. And she wanted her mother more than anything in the world. Daniel understood he needed to find out where she came from and what had happened. Was her mother nearby? Was she hurt? Had they been separated while traveling? He didn't know. But he couldn't leave the girl alone, not even for a moment. He boiled more water, made a small pot of porridge for later, and placed a warm blanket around her shoulders. She leaned against him, not fully trusting him yet, but no longer afraid of him either. When the fire grew stronger, she finally relaxed enough to close her eyes. Within minutes, she fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. Daniel gently moved her so she could lie down comfortably. Her breathing softened. She looked peaceful for the first time since he had found her. Watching her sleep, Daniel felt a heavy weight settle on his heart. He didn't know her story, but he knew she didn't end up in that canyon by accident. Something had gone wrong. Something serious. He sat near the fire, rubbing his hands together, thinking about what he should do in the morning. He needed to ask around. He needed to search the land. He needed to find her mother. But he also knew that finding people was not easy in the desert, especially if trouble was involved. Still, he couldn't ignore what fate had placed in his path. As the night grew quiet, Daniel checked on the girl again. She was sleeping deeply, holding the blanket close to her small face. He wondered what she had seen, what she had run from, and how long she had been wandering. The thought made his chest tighten. No child should suffer that kind of fear. He promised himself silently, right there, in the quiet of his cabin, that he would not let anything happen to her again. Whether it took days or weeks, he would find her mother. Her life was now in his hands, and he wasn't a man who walked away from responsibility. Outside, the desert wind moved softly through the grass. Coyotes howled far off in the distance. But inside the cabin, there was only warmth and stillness. Daniel sat near the sleeping girl, knowing that from tomorrow onward, everything in his life was about to change. He had lived many years with quiet routines, but now there was a small child depending on him. And he could feel, deep inside, that her story was not simple. He didn't know yet that the truth waiting ahead would break his heart. He didn't know that meeting her mother would change his understanding of the world. All he knew, in that moment, was that the desert had brought this child to him for a reason, and he would not fail her. When morning light filled the cabin, Daniel woke to the soft sound of tiny footsteps. The little Apache girl had gotten up before him and was standing near the window, watching the sunrise through the dusty glass. She looked calmer now, though still unsure. When she heard Daniel move, she turned quickly, as if afraid she had done something wrong. But Daniel offered her a warm smile and told her it was all right. She relaxed a little and stepped back from the window. He made breakfast while she sat quietly at the small wooden table. She watched his every move, almost studying him, trying to understand this new place and this man she had unexpectedly trusted. Daniel placed a bowl of porridge in front of her, and she ate slowly, carefully, as if she wasn't used to having enough food. Daniel noticed it and made sure she had more when she finished. After breakfast, she whispered her mother's name again, and that soft sound reminded him of the promise he had made the night before. He had to find her mother. no matter what it took. Daniel grabbed his coat and saddled his horse. The little girl watched him with anxious eyes. When he bent down and asked her if she wanted to come with him, she nodded quickly and held out her hands for him to lift her. She clung to him when he placed her on the horse, almost as if being separated from him was now another fear she didn't want to face. The morning air was cool, and the sky stretched wide above them as they rode toward the nearest settlement. Daniel planned to ask every person he met if they had seen an Apache woman searching for her daughter. The girl sat in front of him, holding the saddle horn with small hands, her eyes moving across the land as if hoping to spot someone she knew. When they reached the settlement, a few people looked up curiously. It wasn't common to see Daniel passing through with a child, especially an Apache child. He visited stores now and then for supplies, but he mostly kept to himself. Daniel went straight to the trading post, where an old man named Wyatt worked. Wyatt had lived in the area longer than almost anyone, and he often heard news from travelers, hunters, and patrol riders who passed through. Wyatt looked surprised when Daniel walked in carrying the girl. He asked Daniel what was going on, and Daniel explained everything he had seen the previous day. He told him how he had found the girl alone in the canyon, tired and frightened. He also explained that she kept repeating her mother's name, though he wasn't sure what had happened to her. Wyatt listened closely, his face growing thoughtful. After a few moments, Wyatt shook his head and said he had not heard about any missing Apache woman recently. But he told Daniel that sometimes small groups moved quietly through the nearby hills, avoiding settlements. They didn't always speak to outsiders, and sometimes trouble in the land forced families to move quickly or hide for safety. Wyatt suggested Daniel check the trading routes or ask the hunters who traveled deeper into the wilderness. Daniel thanked him and stepped out of the trading post, thinking about where to go next. The little girl held onto his shirt tightly while he walked. Her eyes were wide, watching every stranger carefully, as if expecting something bad to happen. Daniel bent down and told her gently that no one would harm her. She didn't speak, but she nodded with a small, trusting movement. They spent the rest of the morning talking to different people. Some shook their heads with pity. Others offered guesses, but no one had seen her mother. As the sun climbed higher, Daniel noticed the girl growing tired. He lifted her onto his horse again and rode slowly toward the nearby hills, hoping to find someone who traveled often and might have information. But even as he searched, he kept glancing at her, seeing how she held herself. She was brave. She was strong. But she was also burdened with fear that no child should carry. After several hours, Daniel decided to stop by an old campsite near a small creek. He let the girl drink fresh water and rest in the shade of a cottonwood tree, while she sat quietly, drawing small shapes in the dirt with a stick. Daniel walked along the edge of the creek, thinking. The land was huge. The hills were endless, and there were many places where a family or a lone woman could be hiding or traveling. He knew he needed help, someone who understood the land better than most settlers. That was when he remembered the old tracker who lived a few miles beyond the creek. The man didn't speak much, but he knew every trail, every hidden path, and every small camp that had ever been built in the hills. If anyone could lead him to the girl's mother, it was the tracker. Daniel returned to the girl and gently lifted her back onto the horse. She rested her head against his chest this time, worn out from the long morning. They followed the creek until it bent toward the hills, and then Daniel steered the horse to a narrow path. The tracker's hut stood near a cluster of rocks, half hidden behind a tall tree. When the old tracker stepped out, he didn't seem surprised to see Daniel. He looked at the girl for a long moment before speaking. His voice was low and calm. He asked Daniel where he found her. Daniel explained everything again, and the tracker listened without blinking. When Daniel finished, the tracker knelt and spoke to the girl softly in her native language. The girl's eyes brightened slightly, and she whispered her mother's name again. The tracker stood and told Daniel that he recognized the name. He said the girl's mother was a strong, quiet woman who belonged to a small Apache camp hidden far deeper in the hills. But the camp moved often for safety, and they kept away from settlers. He explained that the woman had been seen alone a few days earlier, looking worried and searching for something or someone. That was the first real sign. Daniel felt a small wave of relief. She was alive. She was searching. There was hope. The tracker agreed to help Daniel find the woman, but warned him that the path ahead would be long and rough. The hills were sharp, filled with steep climbs and narrow passages. It wasn't a place for careless riders. Daniel didn't hesitate. He said he would go wherever he needed to go. He would not leave the girl without her mother. The tracker packed a few supplies and stepped into the lead. Daniel followed with the girl in his arms. As they traveled deeper into the land, the air changed. The wind felt different. The trees grew closer together, and the quiet around them carried an unusual heaviness. The girl seemed to sense it too. She looked around with wide eyes, not afraid this time, but hopeful, as if she could feel her mother was somewhere nearby. They traveled slowly, stopping only when the rider or child needed rest. Daniel stayed close to the girl the entire time, making sure she felt safe. Each time she woke from a short nap, she looked up at him, and he reassured her softly. She had lost so much in just a few days, and he didn't want her to face one more moment of fear. Hours passed. The sun moved lower, turning the land golden. Finally, the tracker raised his hand, signaling them to stop. He pointed toward a distant area, where smoke rose gently from behind a hill. A small camp, a hidden place. Daniel's heart beat faster. The girl whispered her mother's name again in a trembling voice. She could sense it. She could feel it. They were close now, closer than they had been at any moment since the search began. Daniel held the girl a little tighter, preparing himself for whatever they would find. He didn't know what story waited ahead. He didn't know what truth her mother carried. But he knew one thing well. He had promised this child that she would not be alone. And tomorrow, or perhaps in just a few hours, that promise might finally be fulfilled. Daniel followed the tracker up the narrow hill path as evening light spread across the land. The little Apache girl clung to his shirt, her eyes fixed on the thin line of smoke rising from behind the rocks. She didn't speak, but her breath grew fast and shaky. It was as if her small heart already knew the person she loved most in the world was somewhere nearby. Daniel felt her trembling, so he held her closer and whispered that everything would be all right. The tracker moved ahead with careful steps, watching for signs along the ground, broken branches, footprints, small marks left by someone passing through. He seemed to read the land like a book. Daniel trusted him completely. As they climbed higher, the wind became cooler, carrying a faint scent of burning wood. The girl looked up in hope, her eyes shining with a mix of fear and excitement. When they reached the top of the hill, the tracker lifted his hand again to signal silence. He pointed down toward a small clearing. There, tucked between tall rocks, was a hidden Apache camp. Smoke rose softly from a fire at the center. A few shelters made of wood and hides stood close together. It was a quiet place, peaceful, guarded, and almost invisible from the open land. The girl gasped softly when she saw the camp. She whispered her mother's name, her voice trembling. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had never seen a child hold so much emotion inside such a small body. He stepped closer to the tracker and asked if they should go down now or wait. The tracker said the camp was cautious around strangers, especially in times of fear. They needed to approach slowly, carefully, with respect. Daniel nodded, knowing this was not the time to rush. He held the girl's tiny hand as they walked down the slope. The ground was soft under their boots, covered with dry grass and smooth stones. The girl pulled gently on Daniel's shirt, wanting to run but too nervous to take the first step. When they reached the edge of the camp, a few Apache men appeared from behind the shelters. They were not threatening, They simply stood still, watching closely, trying to understand who Daniel was and why he had come. The tracker spoke first, using words Daniel didn't understand. One of the men responded, his voice calm but guarded. After a short exchange, the men stepped aside and allowed them into the clearing. The girl stayed close to Daniel, holding his hand tightly. Her breathing grew even faster as she looked around. Then, without warning, a woman stepped out from one of the shelters. She was tall, with long, dark hair braided loosely down her back. Her face carried both strength and exhaustion. When her eyes fell on the girl, her lips parted, and she froze. The girl whispered her mother's name again, louder this time, her voice breaking. The woman took one shaky step forward. Her hands lifted to her mouth as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Then she ran. The girl broke from Daniel's side and ran toward her mother at the same time. They met in the middle of the clearing, the mother falling to her knees as the girl wrapped her arms around her neck. The woman held her daughter as if she would never let go again. Tears streamed down her face. The girl cried too, clinging to her tightly. It was a reunion filled with pure love, fear, relief, and pain all mixed together into one moment. Daniel stood quietly, watching them. His chest felt full and heavy. He had brought the girl home. He had kept his promise. And yet, seeing the raw emotion between mother and daughter stirred something deep inside him, something he didn't fully understand. Something that felt like more than relief. The woman held her daughter for a long time before she finally looked up at Daniel. Her eyes were full of gratitude, but there was also sorrow in them. She stood slowly, lifting her daughter into her arms. Then, with the tracker translating, she thanked Daniel for saving her child. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Daniel shook his head and said he had only done what anyone should do. But the tracker shook his head gently and whispered that very few people would have done what Daniel did. When the girl's mother asked to speak to Daniel alone, he felt a strange heaviness settle over him. He followed her to a small place near the fire, where they sat facing each other. The girl stayed close, holding her mother's dress, still afraid to let go. The woman placed a hand on her daughter's head, gently comforting her. Then, she looked at Daniel. Through the tracker's translation, she began to tell her story. She said that she and her daughter had been traveling with a small group a few days earlier. They were moving quietly through the land because there had been danger nearby. The woman tried to keep her daughter safe. But something had gone wrong. They had become separated. The girl had wandered into the canyon, while the woman searched desperately for her. By the time she reached the place where she thought her daughter was hiding, the girl was gone. The mother said she spent days searching, calling her daughter's name, walking through the hills until her feet bled. She slept on the ground, hoping to hear a cry or find a sign. But every time she asked for help from settlers passing through, they turned her away. Some shut their doors, others walked past her without listening. She said that several people looked at her with fear or distrust simply because she was Apache. They didn't want to hear her story, didn't want to understand her pain. She felt invisible, helpless, and alone in the world. The more she spoke, the quieter Daniel became. Each word struck him deeper. He felt his heart twist painfully. He had imagined she was searching for her daughter, but he never imagined she had been shut out again and again by people who could have helped but didn't. He felt ashamed for the world she had walked through. He felt anger at the thought of a mother begging for help while others walked away. And he felt something else too, a deep sadness that settled heavy inside him. The tracker translated her final words softly. "I thought I would never see her again. I thought she was lost forever." Daniel swallowed hard. He didn't know what to say. He looked at the girl, still holding her mother's dress tightly, her small face pressed into her mother's side. He remembered finding her on that dusty ledge, trembling and alone. He remembered her small hand holding onto his shirt when she slept. He remembered the fear in her eyes every time someone new came close. He felt his heart break not because of something he lost, but because of what the mother and child had suffered before he found them. He realized how close the girl had been to a fate no child should face, and how close the mother had been to losing her forever. And he realized that all the woman needed from the world was one kind person, just one willing heart. But she had met none until him. The woman reached out and touched Daniel's hand lightly, thanking him again. Her touch was gentle, full of sincerity. Daniel felt a warmth in that simple gesture, something indescribable, something that made his breath catch. For the first time since arriving, he understood that his life had crossed theirs for a reason. He stayed with them as the moon rose, listening to the quiet sounds of the camp, watching the girl lean against her mother's shoulder as she finally relaxed. She looked safe. She looked home, and yet, she still turned to look at Daniel often, as if he had become part of her world now. As night settled, the tracker stood and whispered that there was still one more part of the story the mother had not shared. Something deeper, something painful. Daniel looked at her, and she lowered her eyes, gathering her strength. She said she had not told him everything yet. Her truth, the real truth, was still waiting. And when she spoke it, Daniel's heart would not remain the same. Night settled over the hidden Apache camp, covering the land in soft shadows. The fire in the center burned gently, sending a warm glow across the clearing. Daniel sat near it with the little girl beside him and her mother across from him. The tracker had stepped away to give them space, leaving the three of them together beneath the quiet sky. Daniel sensed that the woman was gathering the courage to share the truth that she had held close for many days, maybe even longer. The girl leaned sleepily against her mother, holding her dress with one hand. The mother ran her fingers through her daughter's hair, calming her, reassuring her that she was safe now. But Daniel could see the heaviness in the woman's eyes. There was more. She needed to say something she had held inside, because she feared it would bring pain. Finally, with a deep breath, she looked at the tracker and nodded. The tracker moved closer, so he could translate her words. She spoke slowly, carefully, as if each sentence carried a memory that still hurt. She explained that she had hidden her daughter in the canyon on purpose, not because she wanted to leave her, but because she didn't know what else to do. Trouble had come near the camp. There had been a danger, and she feared that staying together with her daughter would put the child at greater risk. She had intended to hide the girl just for a short time, then return immediately. But when she came back, the girl was gone. Her voice broke as she spoke. She said she screamed her daughter's name until her throat burned. But no sound came back from the canyon. She had searched the land until day and night blended together, her heart filled with fear. Every time she approached settlers for help, they turned away from her or looked at her with suspicion. She said she walked miles, hoping to find someone who cared enough to listen. But the world closed its doors on her. Daniel's chest tightened as he listened. He felt a strange ache inside him, part anger at how she had been treated, part sadness for her pain, part guilt for belonging to a world that had failed her. The woman wiped her eyes as she continued speaking. She said the worst part was not the desert, the hills, or the long days of searching. The worst part was the feeling that she was invisible, that her daughter was alone because no one cared enough to help. When she finished, her voice fell quiet. The tracker translated her last words softly. She said that Daniel had done what she believed no one else would ever do again. He stopped, listened, and cared. He found her daughter. One. He brought kindness back into a world that had shown her only fear. Daniel sat quietly, unable to speak for a moment. The fire crackled gently between them. The girl looked up at her mother, then at Daniel, as if she understood they were speaking about her, even if she could not catch every word. Daniel reached out and placed his hand over his heart, telling the woman through the tracker that he only wanted the girl to be safe, that he couldn't imagine leaving a child alone in the canyon. The woman smiled softly, her eyes warm but tired. She said that kindness was rare, and people like him were rarer still. Daniel felt heat rise in his chest. Not embarrassment, but something deeper. Something that made him look at the woman in a different way. Not as a stranger, not even as the mother of the child he had found, but as someone whose strength humbled him, someone who had carried the weight of the world alone until he arrived. As the night grew colder, the mother prepared a sleeping place for her daughter inside one of the shelters. The girl refused to let go of Daniel at first. She held his fingers and shook her head, not wanting him to leave. The mother gently coaxed her, telling her in soft words that she was safe now, that Daniel wasn't going anywhere. The girl trusted her mother and finally allowed herself to lie down. She clung to a small blanket while her mother hummed a calming tune until she fell asleep. Daniel stepped outside, giving them a moment alone. He walked toward the quiet edge of the camp, looking at the moon above the dark hills. The night air was cool and carried the scent of pine and smoke. The world felt wide and peaceful. But Daniel's mind was restless. Meeting the girl had changed something inside him. Meeting the mother had changed even more. He heard soft footsteps behind him. When he turned, the woman stood there, wrapped in a warm shawl. She walked up to him and thanked him again, not in a loud voice, but in a quiet, heartfelt one. The tracker wasn't nearby, but she still tried to express her words with gestures and the few English words she knew. She placed her hand over her heart, then gently touched the bracelet around her wrist, a bracelet made of small carved beads. She slipped it off and held it out to Daniel. He shook his head at first, saying she didn't need to give him anything, but she insisted, pressing the bracelet into his palm. Her eyes told him everything he needed to understand. This was not a payment or a gift. It was a sign of deep gratitude, a symbol from her world given to someone she trusted. Daniel accepted it with respect, promising he would keep it safe. They stood side by side for a long moment, looking out over the hills. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was peaceful, almost comforting. Even without many words, they understood each other. Two people from different worlds, connected through a child they had both fought to protect. The next morning, Daniel woke to the sound of soft laughter. The girl was playing outside the shelters, feeling safe enough now to wander a few steps away from her mother. She ran to Daniel when she saw him, gripping his hand tightly. Her smile was small, but genuine, the kind that showed she had finally found peace again. Daniel stayed in the camp for a few days, helping repair shelters damaged by a recent storm. He gathered wood, fixed broken support poles, and shared simple meals with the people. The girl followed him everywhere. Whenever he sat, she sat beside him. Whenever he worked, she stayed close, handing him small sticks or simply watching him with trusting eyes. The mother often glanced at them with a soft expression, grateful for the bond they had formed. As days passed, Daniel realized something unexpected. He didn't want to leave. The camp felt calm, alive, filled with a gentle warmth he hadn't felt in years. The mother spoke to him more each day, learning some English, while he learned small Apache words in return. Their conversations were simple, but they carried meaning. Every shared smile, every gesture, every quiet moment added another thread to the invisible bond forming between them. But Daniel knew he couldn't stay forever. His ranch needed him. His horses needed care. And his land required attention. One evening, as the sun painted the hills orange, he told the mother he would need to return soon. The girl's face fell when she heard that. She held his arm tightly, shaking her head in fear that he would disappear from her life. Daniel knelt and told her gently that he would come back. He placed a hand over her small shoulder and promised that she would see him again. The mother watched the scene quietly, her eyes soft but a little sad. She knew Daniel had a life outside the camp, yet she also knew he had become part of theirs in a way neither of them expected. Before Daniel left, the mother approached him with the tracker. She said he would always be welcome in their camp. She said that their doors, usually closed to outsiders, would open for him any time he came. Daniel felt something warm bloom in his chest at her words. The girl hugged him tightly before he mounted his horse. Daniel held her close, promising again that he would return. When he rode away, the girl stood beside her mother, waving until he disappeared behind the hills. As Daniel followed the long trail back to his ranch, he looked down at the bracelet on his wrist. It felt like a piece of the camp, a piece of the woman and the child he had come to care for. He realized that finding the lost girl had changed more than her fate. It had changed his heart, too. And deep inside, he knew he would soon return, not just because he had made a promise, but because a part of him now belonged there, with them.